Yesterday, the Trump administration told us no tax on under $150,000 of income per year is the goal. Mind you, if you make exactly $150,000 a year, you pay the government $37,000. That's just the federal government. Don't mind sales tax, registration fees, and all the other BS. It's a lot of money. People work hard for this money. But there's been some talk about the realism of this, and today we get some insights thanks to another interview with Mr. Lutnick. We get some insights in terms of when we might expect this no tax on under $150,000, and we'll go through some of the realism of the claims so that way you can make an educated and informed decision. Now, in case you missed yesterday's video, here's just a quick reminder of the 10-second clip of what the promise was. And then I want you to hear the promise here, which is a goal. He does make it clear it's a goal. And then you could hear the follow-up comment today and how things are getting revised a little bit and where we stand now. Let's listen in. This was yesterday.
I know what his goal is. No tax for anybody who makes less than $150,000 a year. That's his goal.
That's the goal. That's what we heard. Now, Martha McCullum, who's a straight shooter, she hits right to the core. Hey, first thing, hey, you said no tax on under $150,000. Tell us some more about this. Also, when? We're going to get that in this video. Let's get into it.
Here today. Great
to see you. So what about that? You said on CBS that President Trump wants no taxes on people making below $150,000 annually, and our sources are saying that the Treasury Department doesn't have any plan to put that into action.
No, that's taking it out of context. What we discussed was when the president balances the budget, his first move is going to be, he has suggested that he would like to waive taxes for people under $150,000. That's aspirational, that when we balance the budget. And let me tell you, he's got a plan to balance this budget, right? We are going to take $1 trillion out of the waste, fraud, and abuse of all of our entitlements and all of our systems and all of our waste.
Wait a second. Waste, fraud, and abuse, $1 trillion, waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, this is important because so far we've been making some progress, but it's been a little bit of one step forward, two steps back. That's because the government expenditures so far under the Trump administration and through February have been the highest that we have ever seen. So spending in February for any other February in history for the United States has been the highest ever. Now, of course, the Trump administration argues that's because of the lingering programs of the Biden administration, and that's what they're trying to fix. Okay, fine. But spending has gone up. Now, we do have DOGE that's working to help, and if we take DOGE at what they say, as 100% credible. Let's make that argument, okay? They claim right now they've saved about $18 billion in American taxpayer money, which is great. Let's assume for a moment that they're 100% correct because there are allegations that they double count, triple count, they count old contracts that had already been canceled, they count as the same weight, recurring and non-recurring contracts, which, that's important. If we wanted no taxes on $150,000, we need to save this money every single year. So, cutting a one-time expense is great, but cutting a recurring expense like a salary for a DEI worker, let's just say, somebody working on implementing DEI, that, obviously is recurring. That saves more money. So let's say that DOGE is right, and the amount that they've claimed of $18 billion of savings is accurate. Well, that works out to about $116.88 per taxpayer in savings, which is good, but we're not quite yet there where we're making enough money to offset the taxes we're paying under $150,000. Remember, people making $150K, $37,000 in taxes. Obviously, somebody making $50,000 a year is going to pay a significantly lower amount in taxes, but still, $116 in total savings per American taxpayer, $154 million of them, not quite there. And especially since the DOGE dividend is talked about potentially being a 25% portion of this, we kind of have to evaluate priorities here. Like, we're going to do 25% as a DOGE dividend, then only 75% potentially goes to reduction of costs. So 25% of DOGE dividend, by the way, is $29. And if they kept this cutting up, that is every 6-ish weeks, they were able to cut $18 billion in savings, then we can multiply this $29 to figure out an annualized Doge dividend by about 8.6, 52 divided by 6 for 6 weeks, says they could cut 18 times 8.6 times, so basically $18 billion, 16 or 8 different periods. What do we get with that? Well, then we get $155 billion of cuts. That's great. That works out to a little bit more in terms of a Doge dividend. If we could get that kind of Doge dividend, we're talking about $246 as a Doge dividend. Still a far cry from being able to offset, though, the massive cost that it would take to overcome to have no taxes on under $150,000 of income. Yesterday, we estimated in our video that it would be about $660 billion. So some estimates vary. Some are like 575, some are 550, some are 700. They vary. My numbers are $660 billion. To offset $560 billion of taxable income income that the government is generating from taxes, we're gonna have to do a lot more work than Doge is currently doing. Now, Lutnick suggests that's okay because we've got the green card or the gold card, the new Trump card coming. You're going to hear him comment on this. It's worth remembering. What we talked about yesterday was there are 2 million people with $10 million net worths or more around the world that aren't already in the United States. Something I didn't talk about yesterday is even if you tempted some people to do it, you have to ask yourself, does it make more sense to spend $5 million for the gold card? And I know this is wrong and you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, does it make sense to get married to a citizen in the US and do it basically for free? Plus the cost of your wedding. You could have one hell of a glorious wedding for $5 million. I'm just saying. Okay. Anyway, so I think there's a high bar here for how many people are really going to go for this $5 million Trump card. I think what you'll find is you'll have a lot of people who want to sort of say, oh, I'm friendly with Trump. I'm a Saudi prince. I don't even want or care about American citizenship, but I have billions of dollars, so let me go buy the gold card because it's cool. I think that's going to be more of your customer than people who actually want to come over. But anyway, let's keep listening.
And then we are going to raise $1 trillion. That's the Trump card. The Trump gold card is going to be a huge revenue producer. Tariffs are going to be a huge revenue producer. And then getting rid of all the tax scams like Ireland making $75 billion trade, budget surplus. We've got all the ships of the world having Liberian. Imagine a Liberian flag so they get out of paying U.S. taxes. You cut all that stuff out. You got to.
He's starting to sound more and more Trump every day. You got a Liberian flag. I can't believe they're flying the Liberian flag. Anyways, I had to do that. Okay, let me explain that quickly. The reason I want to explain this stuff, by the way, is because I want you to be able to look at these numbers, or at least listen to these numbers, and ask yourself, does it sound realistic that we're going to be able to cut out taxes on those making under $150,000 a year? And so far, Doge does not quite get us there. And the numbers that I was doing for Doge were assuming that Doge can do the same amount of cutting the rest of the year that they've done the first 6 weeks. But usually what happens if you go around with the axe, you're taking around the easy to cut stuff first, the low-hanging fruit. And then it actually becomes harder and harder and harder to save more money without causing even more disruption. So those are things that we have to be careful of. So Doge, everybody is in support of government efficiency. There's no doubt about that. Problem is, the more you got to cut deeper, the more you're potentially getting closer to those vital organs, right? In addition to that, some people wonder, what do they mean about Ireland and Liberia? Like, why does this stuff keep coming up? All right, let's do a quick explanation. So Ireland has a corporate tax rate of 12.5%. The United States has a corporate tax rate of 21%. That's an 8.5% difference. So what do multinational companies do that get revenues from a bunch of different places around the world? They throw their headquarters in Ireland, and then they pay Irish corporate taxes, 12.5%, and they're like, "Ooh, look at us. We pay less in taxes because it makes sense. Why wouldn't you go where the taxes are the lowest? If, you could park your car or a car in Ireland and pay half the taxes, you probably would park a car there as well because that car would pay for itself many times over." This is obviously an extreme example. The downside of potentially going after those companies is raising the costs for those companies, and then would those costs get potentially passed on to us? Now, people like Warren Buffett say, hey, if the top 800 companies paid their fair share, we wouldn't have to tax people because we'd have so much money in America. But some of this goes into deductions, and is it fair that when Amazon builds a factory, they could take all these deductions and then pay less in income because they're building factories and creating jobs? People go back and forth on this, right? Like, is it fair that Amazon doesn't pay income tax sometimes? Right. Anyway, topic for a different video. The other thing, though, that Trump has proposed is actually lowering corporate taxes in the United States down to 15%. That would make that Irish spread only 2.5% instead of 8.5%, which would make it more desirable to potentially just stay headquartered in the United States. Maybe you could capture more of those revenues in the United States. However, now you're going from 21% to 15%, so now you're losing that of the companies that are willing to pay that 6% increase. So how do you make that up? This is a hard thing about government. It's like everything screws everything up. Like, for example, this Liberian ship scam. Okay, this is in reference to Liberia reducing registration and tonnage fees for ships, as well as having limited beneficial ownership disclosures. So it makes it easier for people to kind of hide their ownership of basically cargo shipping companies. So this is also, by the way, why cruise ship stocks have been doing a little poorly in the last few weeks, because Lutnick's really been targeting the ship industry. And the more he targets the ship industry, the more people at cruise lines are like, oh my gosh, we take advantage of convenient labor laws because we fly either a Liberian flag, or often what you'll see is like a Bahamian flag or Jamaica, whatever. And one of the reasons you see that is because you have substantially fewer labor laws, but you also have lower taxation for these ships based on the weight of the ships. Example, in America, as soon as you work I think it's the 7th day in a row, you have to start getting paid overtime. It's kind of like after 8 hours of work, you get paid time and a half. After 12 hours, you get paid 2x, right? That also works for consecutive days in a row. Well, the problem with that is if you're on a cruise ship and you're on a 3-month contract, the cruise ships are used to not actually giving people a day off. They give them many months off, but you work every single day for the months that you're there. So the style of business that they've aligned with would be screwed if you change some of these things. So there's the potential downside to the cruise industry stocks. That's why you're seeing those. But there's also the potential that if you change some of these Liberian flag rules, the costs for cargo go up. And now all of a sudden you have tariffs increasing costs for goods coming into the country, but also to move goods around, you increase the cost for those, which could potentially increase costs for consumers. So as usual, when we actually, it's easy for politicians to spew stuff at us. It's really hard to go one by one and go, whoa, how much work is Doge really doing? Whoa, how much is it really going to have to take to get to no income taxes on 150K? Well, what do you mean, Irish scam? Let's look into that. There's a lot. Yeah, maybe everything together can make it happen. And that's why I think Martha goes right into, okay, when? How long?
A balanced budget, but on the way, we're going to cut no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security.
Good. So when should Americans expect a balanced budget by? What is the goal on that?
Smart. Next question.
I love that question. Think about it. Our objective is during President Trump's term, over the next 4 years, we are going to try to balance the budget. Now, obviously, the sooner we balance that budget, the more we can all enjoy the possibilities that exist under Donald Trump's presidency. He would like to replace the Internal Revenue Service with the External Revenue Service and let all those countries who just lean on our economy.
Years, you're saying it could take as long as 4 years, but
oh no, I don't want it to take 4 years. Okay. We want it to take 3. We want it to take 3, and obviously aspirationally, okay, I'd really like it to take 2.
Yeah, 2, so they could maintain seats, right? Because generally a president loses seats during midterms. Politics becomes unpopular, so you lose seats by midterms. And if they could get to no tax on 150K by midterms, they'd probably gain seats.
So that he has the last 2 years to hammer away, get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, and start to replace it with the External Revenue Service.
A balanced budget. But just to be clear on this, you said that no taxes for people under $150,000. So you're saying that could happen in the next 2 years. So I'm just looking at the numbers here. The bottom 90% of the U.S. tax base is people under around $150,000. That's the way they lay it out. That is $531 billion in federal taxes. It's a quarter of all federal tax revenue. So you're saying in 2 years, we could be in a position where people who make under 150K will pay no taxes in America?
Well, this is aspirational, right? When we balance the budget, that is a move that the president...
All right, that's fair. So we got to get to the state of balancing the budget. You know, people like Vivek, by the way, have made the argument like, oh, you know, we didn't used to have an income tax. Yeah, well, things have grown a little bit since then. I'll give you some numbers here so you can see why it's problematic to listen to things that sound good. Look, what Vivek is saying sounds great. It sounds wonderful. Oh, no income tax at all. Oh, that sounds great. And he compares to a time where the majority of the time the US has been around, we haven't had an income tax. Okay, let's break that down after you hear it.
Look, in the long run, I'm of the school of thought, Sean, that in the very long run in the United States, I'd like to see the elimination of the income tax across the United States of America. It was only in 1913 that we adopted an income tax. For most of our national history, we didn't have one. I want Americans across the board to be able to keep as much of what they earn so they have an incentive to work, an incentive to achieve. But I do think in the next step, a lot of states are going to have to step up and lead the way.
Yeah. This sounds great. I think states can probably pull it off. Like California should not be taxing this much, but we know they waste a lot on stupid things like high-speed rail and homelessness that they don't end up solving. We know there's a lot of waste in government. But let's compare for a moment what our country was like back then versus now. In 1913, which is the year that Vivek talked about, our government's budget was around $720 million. And you have to adjust that for inflation. So today, that's about $22.8 billion. Our government today, compared to back then, is almost 300 times larger. 296 times larger to be exact. That's insane. Now you might wonder, like, wait, but like, we want smaller government. Fair. But what did we not have in 1913? We didn't have Social Security. Social Security began in 1935. 21% of our government spending goes to Social Security today. Okay, well, I don't know that everybody wants to get rid of Social Security. Medicare started in 1965. That's 15% of our spending. Public health, 13%. Military, 13%. Income security, so like, you know, you're down on your luck and you need some food stamps just to be able to survive, 11%. So the government has substantially increased its size in part because it's providing substantially more social safety nets. Now, we might be anti those, we might be pro those. Ultimately, that's your decision. But we can't really compare to 1913 because we're not comparable at all to those numbers anymore. Doesn't mean there aren't things to fix. But I want you to think about this for a moment. World War I, you know how much that cost? It was $32 billion back then, over 4 years. If you adjust that for inflation, that's almost $900 billion in 2025 dollars. Okay. Well, what's our current annual budget for the Department of Defense? It's about $900 billion. So that means back then, we spent fighting World War I in 4 years what we spend in 1 year today. So we have 4 times the military spending. But military spending represents less than 3% of our economy. This much. Like, if this is our economy, the width of this screen is our economy, we spend like this much on military today. What did we spend on military in World War I? 52%. 52% of the economy went to military spending. So now when we put that together, we're like, okay, well, if 52% of our spending back then went to, or of our entire economy, right? All of GDP went to the military. Today it's only 3%. That means we basically had a majority military economy back then. And that's true. I mean, women were pumping lead in factories to manufacture bullets and bombs. We had a wartime economy. Everybody was basically involved in the war effort. Super different than today compared to today. 3% of our dollars, or 3% of our GDP is wartime spending. So when we consider that, it sounds nice what Vivek is saying, but it misses some really key parts. You know, I like this analogy that if we spend 4 times as much now as we did during World War I, inflation adjusted, then what I could really do is take 3% divided by 4, 0.75. Back then it was 52% of our GDP divided by 0.75. Yeah, right now, our military spending, or our economy compared to our military spending, is 69 times larger than what it was back then. It's just sort of another analogy to show you how huge everything has gotten. I mean, in fairness, the United States back then, like, people were like, oh, well, in the 19th century, the United States was able to raise a lot of revenues through tariffs. Yeah, but the government was a fraction of the size. The government was like 1/10 the size of what it was in 1913 in the Civil War. And that was also a wartime effort. You know, it grew 10x between the Civil War and World War I. So you're really talking about a baby of a government. Federal government. I mean, we're knocking on the door of the colonic era, right? Where the colonies had to stamp duty their own revenues. So the federal government barely existed for, 70 years at that point, 70, 80 years. So anyway, these comparisons to history we have to be really careful about, and I'm trying to provide you that insight, because even things that we take for granted today, like police and fire and public schools, which a lot of those are funded by local taxes, right? Property taxes or sales taxes. Those didn't exist back then. So again, some explanations on how things are different. Let's listen to a little bit more Lutnick, though.
Has on his mind and that he has discussed. Balance the budget, and then let's take care of all of the people. Like you said, the 90% of Americans who are 150,000 or less. That's why they
93.
elected Donald Trump. That's why you've got Elon Musk and Doge. You know, everybody forgets why if you take $1 trillion out of the waste, fraud, and abuse of our systems, and then you have the tariffs leading, what Donald Trump is leading with, and then you produce drill, baby, drill, right? And then you have the Trump card probably raising between $500 billion and $1 trillion a year.
Yeah.
You've got a balanced budget. You've got a fundamental change of America.
Yeah, just remember, raising 500 to 1 trillion per year, that means you've got to get to $1 trillion, you've got to get to 200,000 people every year buying the gold card.
The Trump gold card so far, Howard, how many people?
Well, we're going to announce over the next 2 weeks a pilot program, which is going to help Congress be able to score that in and help this reconciliation bill. But we expect tens of thousands. I mean, just the inquiries I've had.
Tens of thousands isn't 200,000, but okay.
Tens of thousands of applications at $5 million each. We are working our tails off to balance the budget for the American people and for Donald Trump. That's why they elected Donald Trump, and he is working really hard.
You say the goal is in the first 2 years. That would be when the midterm comes up. So that would be a pretty big deal. Let me ask you about this. I want to play this because Doug Ford and you are about to meet, correct? The premier from Ontario. A lot of heated conversation going back and forth. I should point
Doug
out
Ford
to
is
people
coming, and the Minister of Finance is coming.
Okay,
so
great.
the central government is coming as well.
So Doug Ford was always a big Trump fan. But now he's saying that, he feels that the United States has turned the guns on their closest ally. He says it's so disappointing. I'm sure you're going to hear some of this in a few minutes from him, that the U.S. is attacking the families of Canada, the food on their tables. But here, let's go to call for number one, the back and forth between President Trump today and Doug Ford. Why?
Yeah, this.
We don't need their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't need their lumber. We don't need anything they have.
We're your largest customer. There's no one that buys more products off the United States than we do. You're going to be paying a lot more for everything right across the board because you can't get aluminum anywhere else. You only produce.
You can. Okay, I'm going to summarize the rest of this. First of all, the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, they want more tariffs. Why? Because tariffs are protectionist and they help protect union worker jobs. The problem is, you've got less than 500,000 union auto workers that actually work right now. You've got maybe 700,000 UAW retirees. So you're paying a lot of retiree benefits for UAW auto workers. But that's redundant, UAW. Anyway. But you've got about 400,000 people who are actively working, less than 500,000. Let's go with 500,000 for a moment. 500,000 actual workers divided by the workforce that we have today of 154 million is less than 1/3 of 1% of workers. So to protect the auto worker, what you're doing is you are helping less than 1/3 of 1% of workers in America at the cost of the other 99 and 2/3%. because they might have to pay for more expensive cars. That's the idea of this, right? That NAFTA, USMCA, aluminum trade, and existing supply chains made everything more efficient and cheaper over time so the consumer could benefit. When we want to rebuild those supply chains, what we do is what happened during COVID. We raise costs because we break supply chains. We raise costs, we have to rebuild them, we have to re-globalize, and all of that is hard. It takes time. Consider, for example, an aluminum, electrolysis plant, for example. It takes massive energy infrastructure, it takes massive investments, and probably takes somewhere around 2 to 3 years to actually get done. So, all that said, some of the things we're hearing here, they sound good. But when we actually look at the numbers, there are some problems. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this insight helpful, and we'll see y'all in the next one. Goodbye and good luck.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.